As many of you know, my wife and I still farm, and for a part of August, I had the pleasure of being able to be on the tractor and have some quality time to think about what makes our nation great. And there are many reasons, but one of them is the belief that everyone has a say in the decisions we make in this democracy. That each of us, from the richest to the poorest, has an equal stake in electing our leaders and impacting how we govern. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court hasn't figured that out. From the Citizens United case to this year's McCutcheon decision, the justices continually side with big money and corporations. They're siding with those who think government should work for the rich and the elite. They're siding with those who think that money equals speech and think it's okay for the wealthy to drown out the voices of the working folks, of the middle class, of everyone else. Madam President, our current election system is hurting our democracy by reducing public confidence in our elections and increasing apathy in the political process. After all, why should someone take time out to follow our political process and vote when our system leads them to believe that their vote doesn't make a difference? We simply can't let that happen. I agree with my colleague from Arizona, Senator McCain, when he says that sooner or later, our current system is going to cause a scandal in this body. This body cannot afford to fall further out of favor with the American people. After all, negative numbers are right around the corner. The unprecedented amount of money, much of it unaccountable and anything but transparent, is allowing corporations to have an outsized say in not just who gets elected, but how they act once they get into office. And trust me, corporate voices already have plenty of influence in Congress. It is putting up walls between regular folks and elected leaders who spend more and more hours on the phone with donors or bowing to those who might finance an outside ad campaign on their behalf, and leaves less time for constituents. Madam President, too many of the justices and too many of our colleagues don't understand that many of Washington's current problems are tied to our campaign finance system. A lot of folks in the Senate and the House talk about working together. They talk about reaching across the aisle for responsible solutions that move our country forward. So what's holding them back? In many cases, it's the threat of big money coming after them in their next election. Now, we're not talking about Rick, who works at Walmart, or Amanda, who teaches third grade, chipping in $20 for a candidate that they believe in. We're talking about corporate executives plowing millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars into independent and often secretly financed campaigns. We've all seen colleagues hesitate to introduce legislation that's popular in their home state, but we're afraid it would spur big moneyed outside groups to spend millions of dollars to defeat them. And when that happens, it leaves constituents without any real say in who represents them. Lawmakers are also held back by a hostile political climate that these expensive campaigns create. When you constantly see an ad that distorts your record, and then you see a fellow senator from out of state endorse that ad, it makes it hard to compromise on legislation with somebody that, quite frankly, you just don't trust. Politicians also know that most of the money in campaigns is on the extremes of the political spectrum, and the extremes fight almost any sign of compromise and the folks that are willing to get things done. Heck, why are we having trouble confirming ambassadors? It's because compromise is a dirty word. It leads me to wonder, could we do big things today like our predecessors did? Could we pull it together to build an interstate highway system or send a man to the moon? Right now, I think not. Supporters of the current system defend their views by citing the Constitution. They put up some fun charts here on the Senate floor that cross out lines of the First Amendment, pretending as if this legislation actually changes the First Amendment. It's entertaining, but it's incorrect. I guarantee you that our founding fathers, men like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, wouldn't want to see the Constitution used to justify our current campaign system. Leaders like Washington and Jefferson had a vision for our nation. They knew America would change with the times as new technologies were developed and new lands came into the Union. Back in 1987, there was no Montana. And if the framers warned against political parties, I can only imagine what they would have to say about the rise of super PACs. Folks who support Citizens United talk about protecting free speech and the First Amendment. But who is protecting the free speech of regular working class folks? Who's protecting the voice of the school teacher or the repairman that's being drowned out by special interest? With this amendment, Madam President, we are, and if the Congress needs inspiration, they should look at my home state of Montana. More than 100 years ago, Montanans voted to limit the influence of big money in elections. We were ahead of the curve. We call for fair elections after wealthy mining corporations bought influence, support, and even a U.S. Senate seat. And our laws worked pretty well for those 100 years. But 2 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Montana's law, citing its own Citizens United decision. In 2012, Montanans stood up once again to big money and its influence over our democratic process. In a voter referendum passed by a 3-to-1 margin, Montana voters called on Montana's congressional delegation to overturn Citizens United, and I proudly accepted that challenge. And that's why I'm co-sponsoring Senator Udall's amendment. Together, we're saying enough is enough. Congress and the states should have the power to regulate campaign spending, to ensure that election spending does not corrupt elections. States should be able to decide whether to allow corporations unchecked spending power in governor and legislative races. Now, I heard one of my colleagues suggest yesterday that we're threatening to silence the voice of the little old lady who wants to put up a yard sign in front of their home. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're working to ensure that her voice is louder than that Fortune 500 corporation, or at least as loud, when deciding the future of her town, her state, or her country. Because that's what our country is supposed to be about. One person, one vote. Spending for the Senate election in Montana in 2012 topped $50 million. That's more than $100 for every vote cast. In a state like Montana, where the average household pulled in $45,000 in 2012, that's a big sum of money. It's the kind of money that can buy you a lot of ads come election season. It can give you a platform to drown out any other voice. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, spending by outside groups in 2014 election cycle, this election cycle, is currently 3 times higher than the amount spent at the same point in 2010. And as of the end of August, outside groups have spent about $170 million on federal midterm races. Just the federal part. Folks don't spend that kind of cash without thinking they're going to get a return on investment. Things are out of control, Madam President. Make no mistake, Senator McCain is right. Sooner or later, it will lead to another Watergate, or worse. And that's the frustrating thing. We know how the story of unchecked money in politics ends. We've seen it before. And yet the Supreme Court has opened the door to yet another scandal. So it is time to overturn Citizens United. And it is time to overturn this year's McCutcheon decision, which invalidated a 40-year-old law that limits the total amount of money an individual can contribute to campaigns each cycle. Since that ruling in April, about 300 folks have taken advantage of that ruling, contributing over $11.5 million to political campaigns this year, just since April. 300 in this nation. 300 in this nation of 300 million. We must put regular people and their ideas back in charge of our elections. Look, amending the Constitution is not something that we should take lightly. The Constitution is our founding document, and it's held up under the test of time. But big money interests and defenders of Citizens United are distorting our First Amendment for their own gain. Getting big money out of elections is critical to improving how we govern, to make responsible decisions for all Americans. It's critical to electing leaders who put people first. I am proud to step forward in this fight. Our democratic system worked for over 2 centuries. It's made our nation the greatest nation in the world, and I will not let that be jeopardized without a fight. Madam President, back in Montana, it doesn't matter whether you've got 5 acres, 5,000 acres. You jump on that tractor's still going to break down. The weather can be good, the weather can be bad, it's still going to happen. The lesson is this: we're in this together. We all need to pitch in, and we all deserve a fair and honest say in how our election process works and our leaders are elected. I urge my colleagues to support Senator Udall on this important amendment. It is simply the right thing to do for our democracy.